Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 787, and today is April 18th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Not a ton to talk about on today's show, but some big and important stories to get through. So I'm going to jump right into it. Just going to ask everybody to, first of all, share the show wherever you're listening. Put it on your favorite social media platform. Recommend it to a friend or family member. Additionally, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee if you want the video version. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And you can get all of my work by following me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _. Additionally, I do the Kyle Anzalone Show every Monday and Wednesday at 4:45 Eastern Time, and you can subscribe to that on YouTube. It's the first link into the show notes page. Let's get into it with this article I wrote yesterday for the Libertarian Institute. U.S.-backed government losing control of Haiti. So, the U.S.-backed government in Haiti and Kenya military forces continue to lose territory to gangs and paramilitaries in Port-au-Prince. The inability to restore order is leading to Haitians to demand a new government. So, according to Human Rights Watch, the Haitian government now controls only 10% of the capital city. Nathan Contrell, senior America's researcher for Human Rights Watch, explained Haiti's security situation is in freefall and Haitians are suffering horrific abuses. The Haitian government has struggled to control Port-au-Prince since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. Following his murder, the U.S. supported the rise of Ariel Henry as leader in Port-au-Prince. Henry proved to be an ineffective prime minister, leading large numbers of Haitians to flee to the U.S. as gangs took over more of the capital. In response, Washington sought a third country to deploy military forces to Haiti to retake control from the gangs. While the Biden administration struggled for over a year to find a nation willing to deploy its soldiers to Haiti, Kenya agreed to send its troops in 2023. In exchange, Nairobi received U.S. financial support and was named a major non-NATO ally. Henry's consent to the Kenyan deployment eventually led to his ouster, with the U.S. then creating a new transitional government with Gary Conley as the new prime minister. Kenyan soldiers began arriving in Haiti in the second half of 2024 with the goal of transferring power to Conley's government, planning to have about 2,500 troops in the country at the start of 2025. At the beginning of the mission, gangs and paramilitaries were estimated to control 80% of Port-au-Prince, so they now control about 90%. The U.S. does not have soldiers operating with the Kenyans in Haiti, but provides funding, training, and equipment for the mission. The support for the Kenyan proxy force in Haiti has continued during the Trump administration. According to Human Rights Watch, the inability of the Haitian government and Kenyan soldiers to retake control has led to the creation of vigilante groups and a spike in violence. Human Rights Watch estimates there were 262 murders in Haiti from late January to March of this year. The opposition groups are now pushing into middle and upper class areas of Port-au-Prince, and protests are emerging demanding a new government. An aid worker explained to Human Rights Watch that the deteriorating situation has left Haitians struggling to survive. They explained, people no longer have a safe place to flee to. Women who come here seeking help have not only lost loved ones, but also have been raped, displaced, and on the streets, starving and struggling to survive. As desperation sets in, the Conley government is resorting to drone strikes to try to turn back the gangs, which have threatened to conduct their own explosive UAV attacks in response. So this is from the Human Rights Watch report. The transitional government, with 3 of its members implicated in corruption, established a task force in early March to fight criminal groups, launching drone strikes with explosive munitions without accountability for abuses. The Human Rights Watch report added, criminal leaders have also threatened to deploy this technology, which, seeing from the Middle East, I'm sure they will be able to get their hands on and deploy. All right, so with the situation in Haiti being awful, I will continue to follow it. We have done that on this show over the past few years, talked about the U.S. creation of the Kenyan force in Haiti, first asking Canada and other countries to lead it. The struggles to actually get the Kenyans to deploy, all the transitions in the Haitian government. And so we will continue to follow this in the future on the show. All right, next up here, U.S.-Ukraine signed memorandum of interest to move forward on minerals deal. So an Ukrainian official announced on Thursday that the U.S. and Ukraine had signed a memorandum of intent to move forward with an economic deal that would give the U.S. a piece of Ukraine's rare earth mineral and other natural resources. So Ukraine's first deputy prime minister and economics minister wrote on X, "We are happy to announce the signing with our American partners a memorandum of intent which paves the way for the economic partnership agreement and the establishment of the investment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The exact details of the deal are unclear, but it's expected to give U.S. companies access to Ukraine's natural resources and involve them in the country's reconstruction." Now, as I have pointed out and been arguing on this show since November when Lindsey Graham first put this plan forward, that this was a real opportunity for the warhogs to kill Trump's better intentions, to take away Trump's desire to end the war in Ukraine, and give him an incentive to keep supplying the proxy war. And so there's a couple points I want to make here. The first is that the outlines of this deal that were explained in the New York Times would be that Ukraine is going to pay the U.S. back with 4% interest for all the aid that the U.S. has already given Ukraine, and that the U.S. is going to take all the profits from these natural resource sales. So I think this is going to have a couple of issues. One, if the war in Ukraine were to come to an end, the Ukrainian government is going to need some level of economy and money to provide people with services, right? And so if the U.S. is taking all the profits from their natural resources sales, I think this could be something that kind of really weakens and could potentially destabilize the Ukrainian government if they were to agree to any deal to end the war. So assuming that's true, that's the first problem with this. Now, the second thing I want to point out is when the New York Times reported on this, it said there are no security guarantees in this deal. Now, for the past few years, when Ukraine has talked about security guarantees, and I think initially when they talked about security guarantees, what they were looking for is a written pledge from Washington, from Britain, from France, from Germany, any major European powers, from NATO, an agreement that if Russia invaded, that these countries would fight on the side of Ukraine in a future war. And so that was initially what people were talking about when they were talking about security guarantees. But I think over the past year that has really changed among European leadership, maybe including Ukrainian leadership, where they're no longer talking about a pat or a piece of paper, but rather a troop deployment and an arms deal that would, from their point of view, make it so that Russia would decide it's too costly to reinvade Ukraine. And so they're talking about, dumping a lot of arms, long-range weapons inside Ukraine, the kinds of arms that could be used to hit Moscow, the Russian capital city, launch a lot of strikes in Russia. So that's a piece of the security guarantee. But the other piece of the security guarantee would be deploying British, French, German troops across the Ukrainian front lines to effectively act as a tripwire. That if Russia invades, they'll have to kill these Russians, these Germans, these French, these British soldiers, and that will guarantee that London, Berlin, Paris, Washington will likely be involved and rolled up in future wars. And so what we're talking about here with this particular deal, I think may actually give Ukraine the same kind of security guarantees that they're looking for from London, from Paris, from Berlin. It's going to, what Marco Rubio and others who have been trying to sell this to the Ukrainians have said is that, look, if you give us an economic incentive to care about Ukraine, then we're going to care a lot more about Ukraine. And that would mean, like, if there's some rare earth minerals that are close to the front lines that we're worried about Russia taking, maybe that would mean deploying some American soldiers or at least contractors to that area to defend Ukraine in case of a Russian attack. So it's protecting the American investment and interest in these natural resources. And so that's piece one that I'm concerned about. And piece number two is, let's say Ukraine starts to make a lot of money selling off their natural resources here, right? From my understanding, this would take some time to develop before they are really making a significant amount of money. But let's say, they were able to start to make a significant amount of money. Then, they're paying the Americans back for the weapons that we already sent. And Zelensky says to Trump, I have $50 billion here of a budget. I would like to come and buy some more American weapons. I don't think Trump is going to say no to that. During his first administration, I always like to look back to the first administration because I think that gives us the best window into Donald Trump and who he is. He was willing to embrace Saudi Arabia and to give Saudi Arabia so much of what they wanted because they were pledging to buy U.S. weapons. And Trump thought this was going to be a boon for the U.S. economy. So I think we could face a similar situation in Ukraine if suddenly Zelensky was paying the Americans back and also had a lot of money to spend. Now, moving over to the Middle East, we have this story here from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israel bombs multiple tent camps in Gaza, killing dozens. Overnight, Israeli strikes on Gaza hit multiple tent camps sheltering displaced Palestinians, killing dozens, Gaza Civil Defense Agency said. One attack hit the Al-Mawasi, a tent camp city in southern Gaza that Israel has declared a so-called humanitarian zone but continues to bomb. So a statement from the spokesman for the civil defense told the AFP at least 16 martyrs were killed, most of them women and children, and 23 others were wounded following direct strikes by Israel, 2 missiles on several tents, houses, housing displaced families in the Al-Mawasi area of Khan Yunis. So another 7 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli strike on tents in Bethlehem, a city in northern Gaza that was the scene of Israel's largest anti-Hamas protests on Wednesday. Two other Palestinians, father and son, were killed in an Israeli strike on another part of Al-Mawasi. So far, there has no comment from the Israeli military on the attacks. Gaza's health ministry said on Thursday at least 39 Palestinians were killed, and one body was recovered from the rubble over the past 24-hour period. Another 73 Palestinians were wounded in Israeli attacks. The health ministry's number account for the dead and wounded Palestinians brought to hospitals and morgues. The ministry explained there are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets, and ambulance and civil defense crews cannot reach them. Since Israel resumed its genocidal war on March 18th, which it did with full U.S. support, the ministry said at least 1,600 Palestinians have been killed and 4,400 were injured. Children account for nearly 600 of those killed, or 36%. So just absolutely disgusting numbers. Next up here, this one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on April 17th. Palestinian man dies in Israeli prison just 3 days before scheduled release. So Masab Adali, a 20-year-old Palestinian man from the West Bank, died in an Israeli prison 3 days before he was set to be released. His family says they do not know how the young man died, and they received a report 2 weeks ago that he was in good health. 64 Palestinians have died in Israeli prisons over the past 18 months. For most of Adali's term, he was held in the infamous Medigo prison. And so this is from a Haaretz report in December of 2023. Detainees at the prison in northern Israel have reported several cases of harsh violence and abuse carried out by prison wardens. The torture included guards kicking, punching, and hitting their testicles and humiliating prisoners. Some testified that a prisoner who was beaten died of their injuries. So this, the death of Adali follows the death of 17-year-old Waldi Ahmad, who died in the Mendigo dungeon in March. His family says he was a healthy high schooler when he was arrested in September. An autopsy showed he was subject to starvation and beatings. Since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, numerous reports have surfaced showing that Israel is conducting widespread torture, beating, sexual abuse, medical neglect, dehumanization, and deprivation against Palestinian detainees. Israeli forces have arrested thousands of Palestinians, and many are held in administrative detention without charge or trial. So Adali's family said he was transferred to the Niqab prison about a month ago. A UN report from August of 2024 explained that grave human rights violations had been recorded at that facility, including widespread systematic use of physical and psychological torture and other inhumane and degrading treatment, medical neglect, and starvation of prisoners. The report adds that the latest visit further confirms what other Palestinian human rights organizations have been saying for months: the torture and abuse of Gaza's prisoners was not isolated at the Seed to Min, but is present at all Israeli prisons and detention centers. So Seed to Min has become one of the most notorious and well-known Israeli detention centers. In 2024, an Israeli doctor wrote a letter explaining how Palestinian prisoners were undergoing regular amputations due to the harsh conditions and denied medical treatment. So Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's in charge of the prisons, bragged about the deplorable conditions that Palestinians face in the prison he oversees. He has called on executing detainees to deal with prison overcrowding, as Israel has rounded up a large number of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank over the past 18 months. All right, next up here, we're moving on to Iran. This one from Dave DeCamp, April 17th, antiwar.com. Saudi defense minister visits Iran and meets with the Ayatollah. So the Saudi defense minister arrived in Iran on Thursday, and marked the highest level Saudi official to visit the country in decades. Prince Khalid bin Salman's visit comes about 2 years after Riyadh and Tehran normalized relations under a China broker deal in 2023. The visit signals that Saudi Arabia supports negotiations between the U.S. and Iran and opposes a potential U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. While in Tehran, Prince Khalid met with the Iranian Supreme Leader and delivered a letter from his father, King Salman bin Abdulaziz. So, the Ayatollah said, during the meeting, according to his website, "We believe that relations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Saudi Arabia will be beneficial for both countries and that the two nations complement each other." The Ayatollah said that improving relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia have faced opposition from enemies in the region. "We must overcome these hostile motives, and we are prepared for this in this regard. This is better for brothers in the region to cooperate and assist with each other than to depend on others." So last week, it seemed that talks may be going in the right direction between the U.S. and Iran. We had Steve Witkoff, Trump's personal envoy to the Middle East, who's leading the talks with Iran, come out and say that and indicate that the U.S. was interested in a deal that was reminiscent of Obama's 2015 JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which allowed Iran to enrich nuclear uranium to 3.67%. However, after he said that, there was significant backlash from Iran hots. And on Tuesday, Witkoff walked that back and said that Iran would have to give up its nuclear enrichment capabilities altogether. And so this led to Iran on Wednesday warning the U.S. against moving the goalposts after Steve Witkoff suggested the Trump administration was seeking a deal to eliminate Tehran's civilian nuclear program rather than just the same kind of limited deal, inspections deal that that Obama administration agreed to. So now we have Trump saying he's not in a rush to attack Tehran because Iran wants peace. And so this is from Dave DeCamp, April 17th, antiwar.com. On Thursday, President Trump said he was not in a rush to attack Iran when asked about a report from the New York Times that said he waved off an Israeli plan to bomb Iranian nuclear facilities that would require significant U.S. support. So Trump told reporters in the Oval Office, I wouldn't say I waved it off. I'm not in a rush to do it because I think Iran has a chance to have a great country, to live happily without death, and I like to see that. That's my first option. If there's a second option, I think that would be very bad for Iran, and I think Iran is wanting to talk. I hope they are wanting to talk. It's going to be a very good for them if they do. I like to see Iran thrive in the future. And the problem here with what Trump's saying isn't necessarily with the actual words coming out of his mouth, because I think it's great that he's saying Iran wants to talk. We're going to give it a chance for diplomacy. But I don't think we've ever seen Trump really be able to get any kind of diplomacy over the line. I mean, he was able to negotiate the deal to exit Afghanistan, but he's even, pretty much said that he had planned to stay at the Bagram Air Base there, and that he wasn't planning on leaving Afghanistan in the end. And so if you look at all of Trump's agreements and deals that he's worked out in government, none of them have really come to fruition. And if this is a situation like with North Korea, or say the situation in Ukraine now, it seems as if, he just doesn't have the ability to negotiate these very large and very difficult deals from beginning to completion that require American compromises. And if that's the case, he's basically saying that one day I'm going to end up bombing Iran because, the negotiations aren't going to work out. Because he's not going to let them work out. He's, even if they start to move in the right direction, he's just so easily influenced by the hawks in his administration that they'll talk him out of it. Netanyahu's influenced too. And again, even if Netanyahu, say, doesn't want a war, if he pushes Trump away from talks and Trump says, after talks fail, then we're going to war, we can end up at war here very easily. So Lebanon Information Minister says over 2,700 Israeli ceasefire violations reported. So this is back, a ceasefire came into effect between Hezbollah and Israel on November 26th of last year. Since that time, Hezbollah has complied with the agreement. I think they've launched like a total of 5 missiles into Israel during that time, and Israel has bombed and killed Lebanese civilians almost on a near daily basis. It seems, just constantly blowing up cars driving around in southern Lebanon, taking more territory. This deal was supposed to see, both Israel and Hezbollah withdraw from this area of southern Lebanon, but only Hezbollah has withdrawn from that area, and Israel is actually extending its occupation. Next up here, this one from Jason Ditz again at antiwar.com. Many Iraqis unhappy with Syrian president's invite to Arab League summit in Baghdad. So next month, Iraq will host the Arab League's 34th summit in Baghdad. This is seen as an exciting opportunity for Iraq after the protracted U.S. invasion and occupation to finally reclaim some regional influence for themselves. It has become a source of no small amount of controversy, however, after the announcement on Wednesday that Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, that the president of neighboring Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, has been invited. And of course, al-Shara is Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, a al-Qaeda terrorist who has always been an al-Qaeda terrorist and who very much is a very dangerous man. And it's no surprise that the Iraqis are opposed to him, because he was once deputy of ISIS, and so many Iraqis died in the war against the Islamic State. Next up here, last night, the U.S. carried out a series of horrific attacks on a Yemeni fuel port that killed dozens of Yemeni just workers, fuel workers. It would be like, if Iran had some kind of explosive boat and they drove it up to some oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico and blew it up and killed a few dozen U.S. workers. But even worse, the U.S. continued the strikes even as paramedics were arriving and killed 5 paramedics as well. When Dave DeCamp wrote this up last night, he said the death count was 38. I believe I read this morning the number of deaths is now over 52. So this is just absolutely horrific. A war crime. It's an attack on absolutely civilian energy infrastructure. It's the sickest, most disgusting thing that you could do. But That's what the Trump administration is doing in Yemen. This is the same kind of thing that they've been doing the whole time, like celebrating the destruction of apartment buildings and just bombing a civilian infrastructure all over Yemen. And of course, it's all for Israel. So next up here, the Somali government says U.S. launched airstrikes against al-Shabaab. It appears that as al-Shabaab continues to take territory in Somalia, the U.S. is further backing Mogadishu, giving them more support, helping them carry out more airstrikes, trying to prop up that government. Who knows if it'll work? It may be that, Somalia, just like the rest of the Middle East, these U.S. airstrikes don't actually deter, degrade, or stop these organizations. They actually empower them and give them more support among the local population. And if that's the case, al-Shabaab could continue to move towards Mogadishu. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today and this whole week. Really appreciate it. We have more and more of you tuning into the Kyle Anzalone show, which I really appreciate. I'll have some more guests coming on that show next week, so be sure to subscribe to the program. I'll talk to you all again soon.